Sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin in the most ordinary places. Picture this: a busy hospital corridor, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of disinfectant hanging in the air, and two strangers whose lives are about to become forever intertwined. One is fighting for his life, the other is simply doing her job. Neither knows that this moment will change everything. They thought they knew about love, destiny, and second chances. What happens when the person who saves your life becomes the person you can't live without? The morning of March 15th started like any other Tuesday for Sarah Mitchell. She tied her brown hair back in a neat ponytail, slipped into her white nursing shoes that had seen better days, and grabbed her coffee mug with the faded inscription, "World's Best Nurse," that her niece had given her 3 Christmases ago. At 28, Sarah had been working at St. Mary's General Hospital for 6 years, and she thought she had seen everything the emergency room could throw at her. She was wrong. The ambulance sirens pierced through the early morning calm at exactly 7:43 a.m. Sarah glanced up from the patient chart she was updating, her trained ears immediately recognizing the urgency in the approaching wail. Dr. Martinez rushed past her, his white coat billowing behind him like a cape. "Multi-vehicle accident on Highway 94? He called over his shoulder. 3 coming in, 1 critical." Sarah quickly finished her notes and prepared for what was coming. The automatic doors burst open, and the first gurney rolled in. Then the second. The third one made her heart skip a beat, not because of the medical emergency, but because of something she couldn't quite explain. On that gurney lay a young man, probably around her age, with dark hair matted with blood, and a face that, despite being bruised and swollen, had an inexplicable gentleness to it. 29-year-old male, multiple trauma, possible internal bleeding, vitals unstable. The paramedic rattled off the information as they wheeled him into Trauma Bay 3. Sarah found herself following, even though she wasn't assigned to that room. "Sarah, I need you here," called Nurse Peterson from across the hall, but something kept Sarah rooted to the spot. She watched as Dr. Martinez and his team worked frantically over the unconscious man. The monitors beeped erratically, painting a grim picture of someone hovering between life and death. His name was David Chen, she learned from the chart. 29 years old, software engineer, no emergency contacts listed. Those 3 facts seemed impossibly sad to Sarah. Here was someone fighting for his life, and there was no one to call. No one sitting in the waiting room, wringing their hands with worry. No one to hold vigil by his bedside. "He's crashing," Dr. Martinez announced, his voice cutting through Sarah's thoughts. "We need to get him to surgery now." The next few hours blurred together. David went into emergency surgery to repair internal injuries from the crash. Sarah found herself checking on his status more often than she should have, asking Dr. Martinez for updates during her breaks, and volunteering to cover any shifts in the ICU where David would be recovering. "You seem unusually invested in this patient," observed her colleague Jennifer, as they sat in the break room later that evening. "Do you know him?" Sarah stirred her coffee absently. "No, I don't know him at all. There's just something." She trailed off, unable to explain the pull she felt toward this stranger who had literally crashed into her life. The surgery was successful, but David remained in a coma for the next 3 days. Sarah had managed to get herself assigned to the ICU, and she found herself spending every spare moment by his bedside. She talked to him, read in the news, and even brought in a small radio to play soft music. The other nurses thought she was going overboard, but Sarah felt compelled to be there. "You know, they say people in comas can hear everything," she said to his still form on the 3rd evening. "So if you can hear me, David Chen, you need to know that you're going to be okay. You're stronger than whatever did this to you, and you're going to wake up and have an amazing life. I just know it." She was adjusting his IV line when she felt it, the slightest movement of his fingers. Sarah's heart jumped, and she looked closely at his face. His eyelids fluttered, and then, slowly, they opened. Brown eyes, confused and unfocused, stared up at the ceiling. "David?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "Can you hear me?" His eyes moved toward the sound of her voice, and when their gazes met, something electric passed between them. Later, neither would be able to explain what it was. Some cosmic connection, some recognition that went beyond logic or reason. David tried to speak, but couldn't because of the breathing tube. Sarah pressed the call button. "Dr. Martinez, he's awake. David's awake." The next few hours were a whirlwind of medical activity. Tests were run, tubes were removed, and David was gradually brought back to the world of the living. Through it all, Sarah stayed close, translating medical jargon, offering reassurance, and serving as his anchor in the confusing haze of recovery. When David could finally speak, his first words were, "Were you the one talking to me? About having an amazing life?" Sarah blushed. "You heard that? Every word." David said, his voice hoarse but sincere, "You probably saved my life in more ways than one. I was floating in this dark place and your voice was like a lighthouse guiding me back." Over the next week, as David recovered in the hospital, Sarah found reasons to visit his room, even when she wasn't on duty. They talked about everything and nothing. His work designing software for a small tech company, her journey from nursing school to St. Mary's, their shared love of old movies and obscure music. David told her about growing up as an only child with parents who had passed away in his early 20s, which explained the lack of emergency contacts. Sarah shared stories about her large, chaotic family and her dream of traveling to Ireland someday. "Why nursing?" David asked one afternoon, as Sarah was checking his chart. "My grandmother was sick when I was 12, Sarah explained, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. She spent months in the hospital, and there was this one nurse, Mrs. Rodriguez, who made everything less scary. She didn't just take care of my grandmother's medical needs, she took care of our whole family's hearts. I wanted to be that person for other families." David studied her face as she spoke, noting the way her eyes lit up when she talked about helping people. "You are that person," he said quietly. "You've been that person for me." The day David was discharged, they exchanged phone numbers. Sarah told herself it was just to check on his recovery, but her racing heart suggested otherwise. As she watched him walk slowly toward the hospital exit, favoring his left leg that had been broken in 3 places, she felt an unexpected emptiness, as if a piece of her was leaving with him. David turned back at the door and caught her watching. He smiled, the first real unguarded smile she had seen from him, and waved. Sarah waved back, not knowing that this moment would replay in her mind countless times over the next few months. Their first real conversation outside the hospital happened over coffee 3 days later. David had called, ostensibly to update her on his progress, but really because he couldn't stop thinking about the woman who had sat by his bedside when he had no one else. They met at a small cafe near the hospital, and what was supposed to be a quick coffee turned into a 4-hour conversation that meandered through topics as diverse as their childhood fears, their favorite books, and their theories about whether aliens existed. "I have a confession," David said as they prepared to part ways. "I've never believed in fate or destiny or any of that romantic nonsense. I'm a software engineer. I believe in logic and probability and cause and effect. But meeting you, it's making me reconsider everything I thought I knew about how the universe works." Sarah felt a flutter in her chest. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what are the odds? Out of all the nurses in that hospital, out of all the shifts you could have been working, out of all the trauma bays they could have put me in, what are the odds that I would end up in your care? And not just your medical care, but your other kind of care. The kind that probably saved my life just as much as the surgery did." They started seeing each other regularly after that. Coffee dates turned into dinner dates, which turned into long walks in the park, movie nights, and lazy Sunday mornings spent reading the newspaper together. David was everything Sarah hadn't known she was looking for. Thoughtful, funny, incredibly intelligent, but also vulnerable in a way that made her want to protect him, even though he was perfectly capable of protecting himself. For David, Sarah represented a kind of warmth and light he had never experienced. Growing up as an introverted only child, then losing his parents, had left him somewhat isolated. His relationships had been casual, surface-level things that never really touched his heart. But Sarah had literally been his guardian angel during the darkest moment of his life. And being with her felt like coming home to a place he had never been but had somehow always been searching for. 3 months after the accident, they made their relationship official. 6 months later, David told Sarah he loved her while they were watching a terrible romantic comedy that she had insisted on renting. She had been crying at the predictably sappy ending, and David had been watching her instead of the screen, marveling at her capacity for empathy, even for fictional characters. "I love you too," Sarah said, turning away from the TV to face him.
"I think I've loved you since that first day when you opened your eyes and looked at me like you recognized me from somewhere."
"Maybe I did," David said, pulling her closer. "Maybe somewhere in that dark place I was floating in, I knew you were coming to save me." Their relationship wasn't perfect. No relationship ever is. David sometimes retreated into himself when work became stressful, and Sarah had a tendency to worry obsessively about everyone she loved, which could be exhausting. They had their first real fight about 6 months in when Sarah wanted to spend Christmas with her large extended family, and David, who had never experienced that kind of chaotic holiday celebration, felt overwhelmed and wanted to skip it entirely. "It's not about you not liking my family," Sarah said, her voice tight with hurt. "It's about you not understanding that sharing the people I love with the person I love is important to me. And it's not about me not wanting to spend time with your family," David replied, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "It's about me being terrified that I'll say the wrong thing or won't fit in, or that they'll wonder what you're doing with someone like me." The fight lasted 3 days, which felt like 3 years to both of them. They worked it out, of course, with honest communication and compromise. David went to Christmas dinner, but only stayed for a few hours, and Sarah made sure to prepare her family ahead of time so they wouldn't overwhelm him with questions and attention. "Your family is wonderful," David told her later, as they sat on her couch sharing a piece of leftover Christmas pie. "I was an idiot to be worried. Your nephew asked me to help him with his Lego robotics kit, and your dad wants to teach me to play chess. I felt more like I belonged somewhere in those few hours than I have in years." "They love you," Sarah said simply. "Because you make me happy, and because you're lovable. You just have to let people see that." By their first anniversary, they had developed routines and inside jokes and a shared language of glances and gestures that spoke of deep intimacy. David had a key to Sarah's apartment, and Sarah had commandeered half of David's closet and most of his coffee mugs. They were building a life together, piece by piece, day by day. But life, as they were both about to learn, has a way of testing even the strongest connections. The test was coming, and it would either forge their bond into something unbreakable or shatter it completely. Neither of them could have predicted that the very thing that brought them together, Sarah's instinct to heal and save, would become the source of their greatest challenge. The night everything changed started like any other. Sarah was working a double shift at the hospital, and David was home working on a particularly complex piece of code for a new client. They had texted throughout the evening, sharing small updates about their respective work, making plans for the weekend, maintaining the constant low-level connection that couples develop when they're truly bonded. Sarah's last text came at 11:47 p.m. "Finally heading home. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Love you." David's response was immediate. "Love you too. Drive safely." But Sarah never made it home that night. At 12:23 a.m., David's phone rang with a call that would change everything they thought they knew about love, commitment, and what it really means to fight for someone. The phone call that shattered David's world came from Dr. Martinez, the same doctor who had saved his life 18 months earlier. The irony wasn't lost on David, even in his state of shock. "David, you need to get to the hospital immediately. Sarah's been in an accident." The drive to St. Mary's was a blur of red lights, racing thoughts, and desperate prayers to a God that David wasn't sure he believed in. The same emergency room doors that had welcomed his broken body now seemed menacing as he rushed through them, searching frantically for someone who could tell him what had happened to the woman he loved. "Mr. Chen?" A young Dr. David didn't recognize approached him in the waiting area. "I'm Dr. Patel. Sarah was brought in about an hour ago. She was involved in a collision with a drunk driver on 5th Street. David's legs gave out, and he collapsed into one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs he remembered so well from his own recovery period. "Is she? How bad is it?" Dr. Patel sat down across from him, his expression carefully neutral in the way doctors learn to manage when delivering devastating news. "She sustained severe trauma in the accident. We've managed to stabilize her condition, but she has significant brain injuries. She's in a medically induced coma right now while we monitor her brain function." The words hit David like physical blows. Brain injuries, coma. The woman who had pulled him back from the edge of death was now fighting the same battle he had fought 18 months ago. The cruel symmetry of it made him want to scream at the universe for its twisted sense of humor. "Can I see her?" David's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Of course. But I have to warn you, she looks very different from how you remember her. The machines, the tubes. It can be overwhelming." Nothing could have prepared David for seeing Sarah in that hospital bed. The vibrant, caring woman who had sat by his side and talked him back to consciousness was now lying motionless, connected to machines that beeped and hummed with mechanical precision. Her face was swollen and bruised, her head partially shaved where they had performed emergency surgery to relieve pressure on her brain. David pulled up the same type of uncomfortable chair that Sarah had occupied during his recovery and took her hand in his. It was warm but completely limp, and the absence of her usual responsive squeeze felt like another small death. "Hi, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm here." I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere. And he meant it. David took leave from work and essentially moved into the hospital. He slept in the reclining chair next to Sarah's bed, ate cafeteria food, and maintained a constant vigil that impressed even the most seasoned nurses. Day after day, he sat beside her, talking about everything and nothing, reading her favorite books aloud, playing the music she loved on his phone. "Remember our first real date?" he said on day 5, holding her hand and watching her still face for any sign of recognition. "You ordered that ridiculous sundae with about 15 different toppings, and I was so nervous I knocked over my water glass twice. You just laughed and said it was charming that I was nervous, even though we'd already been talking for hours every day for weeks." The nurses who had worked with Sarah were frequent visitors to her room. Jennifer, her closest friend on staff, brought David coffee and made sure he was eating. Martinez checked in daily, not just on Sarah's condition, but on David's well-being too. "You know," Jennifer said one afternoon as she convinced David to take a walk to the cafeteria, "when Sarah was taking care of you, she did exactly what you're doing now. She talked to you constantly, played music, never left your side for long. We all thought she was going overboard for a patient she'd just met." "She saved my life," David replied simply. "And now you're trying to save hers. The circle of it is, well, it's something else." But as the days turned into weeks, David began to understand the full weight of what Sarah's family must have experienced during his coma. The uncertainty was crushing. The doctors couldn't say when or if Sarah would wake up. Her brain scans showed activity, which was encouraging, but the damage was extensive. Even if she did wake up, there was no guarantee she would be the same person she was before. Sarah's family had rallied around David with the same warmth they had shown him during that first Christmas dinner. Her parents, Margaret and Robert, practically adopted him during the vigil. Her sister Emma brought him changes of clothes from his apartment. Her brother Mike made sure David's car was serviced and his bills were paid, while his attention was focused entirely on Sarah.
"She would do the same thing for any of us," Margaret said one evening as she sat on the other side of Sarah's bed, knitting a scarf she said would be waiting for Sarah when she woke up.
"But David, you have to know that what you're doing goes beyond duty or even love. You're giving her every chance to find her way back, just like she did for you." "I don't know how to do anything else," David admitted. "Before Sarah, I was just existing. Going through the motions of life without really living it. She didn't just save my life in that hospital room. She taught me what it meant to really be alive. I can't imagine a world without her in it." 3 weeks into Sarah's coma, David experienced his first real crisis of faith. The doctors had suggested that the family might want to consider long-term care facilities, as there was no way to predict how long Sarah might remain unconscious. The implication was clear. They were starting to lose hope for a full recovery. That night, David found himself in the hospital chapel, a small, non-denominational room he had walked past hundreds of times, but never entered. He wasn't a religious person, but desperation had driven him to seek something beyond medical science and probability. "I don't know if anyone's listening," he said quietly to the empty room. "I don't even know if I believe anyone's listening. But if there's any cosmic justice in this universe, Sarah doesn't deserve this. She spent her entire adult life saving people, helping people, making their worst moments bearable. She's the best person I've ever known, and if you take her away from me, from her family, from all the people she hasn't helped yet, I don't know how I'll make sense of anything anymore." He sat in the silence for an hour, not praying exactly, but opening himself up to whatever forces might be at work beyond his understanding. When he finally returned to Sarah's room, he found Jennifer checking her vitals with an expression he couldn't read. "What is it?" David asked, his heart racing.
"Her brain activity spiked about 20 minutes ago," Jennifer said, her voice carefully controlled.
"And her eye movements are becoming more frequent. These could be signs that she's starting to emerge from the coma." David's knees buckled with relief, but Jennifer quickly added, "But David, you have to understand that waking up from a coma isn't like in the movies. It's usually a gradual process, and we don't know what Sarah's cognitive state will be. She might not remember things. She might not be herself, at least not immediately." David nodded, accepting this information while clinging to the hope that Jennifer's observations represented a turning point. That night, he talked to Sarah more than he had since the early days of her coma. "The doctors think you might be trying to come back to us," he said, stroking her hair gently. "And I know that if anyone is strong enough to fight their way back from wherever you've been, it's you. But Sarah, I need you to know something. Even if you wake up and you don't remember me, even if you're different, even if you need years of rehabilitation to become yourself again, I'm not going anywhere. You didn't give up on me when I was just a stranger to you, and I'm certainly not giving up on you now that you're everything to me. On day 26 of Sarah's coma, David was reading aloud from her favorite novel when he felt the now familiar flutter of her fingers in his hand. But this time was different. This time her grip tightened slightly and held. David's heart hammered against his ribs as he looked up at her face and saw her eyelids moving more deliberately than they had since the accident. "Sarah," he whispered, afraid that speaking too loudly might somehow break whatever spell was being cast. "Can you hear me, sweetheart?" Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused, exactly as David's had 18 months earlier. She looked around the room with the bewildered expression of someone trying to understand where they were and how they had gotten there. When her gaze finally found David's face, he held his breath, waiting for some sign of recognition. "Do I know you?" Sarah's voice was barely audible, hoarse from weeks of intubation. David's heart shattered and soared simultaneously. She was awake and talking, which was more than they had dared hope for weeks. But she didn't remember him, didn't remember their love story, didn't remember being the woman who had saved his life and then shared her life with him. "My name is David," he said gently, the same way she had introduced herself to him during his recovery. "I'm here to help you remember." And so began the most challenging chapter of their love story. Sarah had awakened from her coma, but the brain injury had affected her memory significantly. She remembered her childhood, her nursing training, and her family, but the last 2 years of her life, including her entire relationship with David, were gone. To her, David was a kind stranger who seemed unusually invested in her recovery. The neurologist explained that this type of memory loss wasn't uncommon with traumatic brain injuries. Sometimes memories returned gradually, sometimes they never returned at all. There was no way to predict which category Sarah would fall into. All they could do was provide her with support and stimulation and hope that her brain would heal enough to recover what had been lost. "It's like she's the same person but living in a different timeline," David explained to Jennifer one afternoon as they watched Sarah work with a physical therapist. "She has the same laugh, the same way of tilting her head when she's thinking, the same instinct to take care of other patients even when she's the one who needs care. But when she looks at me, it's like looking through a window at someone who's in a house you can't enter." "Are you going to tell her?" Jennifer asked. About your relationship. David had been wrestling with this question since the day Sarah woke up. The doctors had advised against overwhelming her with information she couldn't remember, suggesting instead that they let her recovery proceed naturally. But watching the woman he loved treat him with polite friendliness was torture. "How do you tell someone they loved you when they have no memory of it?" David said. "How do you explain a relationship that only exists in one person's mind? She might think I'm some kind of stalker or delusional person." But Sarah's natural curiosity and intuition were working in David's favor, even if she didn't realize it. She found herself drawn to him in a way she couldn't explain. She looked forward to his visits more than anyone else's, felt more comfortable talking to him than to her own family members sometimes, and experienced an inexplicable sense of safety when he was around. "There's something about you," Sarah said to him one afternoon during her 3rd week of recovery. "I know the doctors say we were just friends, but when I look at you, I feel like there's more to our story than that. Like there are things I should remember, but can't quite grasp." David's pulse quickened.
What do you mean?
"I mean, sometimes when you're talking to me, I get these flashes of, not memories exactly, but feelings. Like déjà vu, but stronger. And sometimes I catch you looking at me with this expression that's so sad it breaks my heart, even though I don't understand why." This was the opening David had been both hoping for and dreading. Sarah was giving him permission to tell her their story, but he was terrified that the truth might drive her away, or, worse, make her feel pressured to feel something she didn't genuinely feel. "Sarah," he said carefully, "what I'm about to tell you might sound unbelievable, but I promise you it's the truth. We weren't just friends. We were in love. We had been together for over a year when your accident happened." Sarah stared at him for a long moment, her expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been recognition. "That's impossible," she said finally. "I think I would remember falling in love." "You might," David said gently. "The doctors think your memories could come back, at least some of them. But Sarah, I need you to know that I'm not telling you this to pressure you into feeling something you don't feel. I'm telling you because you asked, and because you deserve to know the truth about your life." Over the next hour, David told Sarah the entire story of their relationship, from that first morning when she saved his life to the night of her accident. He showed her photos on his phone, read her text messages they had exchanged, described their inside jokes and shared experiences. Sarah listened with growing amazement, occasionally nodding as if something he said sparked a distant recognition. "Show me the hospital room where it all started," she said when he finished talking. "I want to see where I saved your life." They took a wheelchair journey to Trauma Bay 3, now empty and sterile, but holding the invisible imprint of their first meeting. Sarah sat quietly for a long time, looking around the room as if waiting for it to tell her its secrets. "I can almost feel it," she said finally, "like an echo of something important that happened here. But it's not quite a memory, more like the shadow of a memory." "That's more than we had yesterday," David said hopefully. Sarah turned to look at him with an expression he hadn't seen since before the accident, a look of deep tenderness mixed with something that might have been love, or at least the possibility of love. "David," she said quietly, "I can't remember loving you, but I can feel myself starting to love you again. Is that enough for now?" David's answer to Sarah's question came without hesitation. "It's everything," he said, taking her hand in both of his. "It's more than enough." What followed was the strangest and most beautiful courtship either of them had ever experienced. David found himself in the unique position of falling in love with the same person twice, while Sarah experienced the surreal process of discovering a life she had lived but couldn't remember. It was like reading a book about yourself written by someone else, where all the events were true but felt like they had happened to a different person. The recovery process was long and challenging. Sarah had to relearn not just her relationship with David, but also how to navigate the world with her changed brain. The injury had affected her short-term memory and her ability to process multiple pieces of information at once. Tasks that had been second nature before the accident now required intense concentration and effort. "I used to be able to keep track of 8 different patients, their medications, their treatment schedules, their family members' names," Sarah said one afternoon as she struggled to remember the combination to her hospital locker. "Now I can barely remember what I had for breakfast."
"Your brain is healing," David reminded her gently.
"The doctors said cognitive recovery can take months or even years. You're already making incredible progress. How can you be so patient with me?" Sarah asked, frustration evident in her voice. "I'm not the person you fell in love with anymore. I can't remember our history. I can't do my job the way I used to. I forget things constantly. Why don't you just move on and find someone who isn't broken?" David stopped walking and turned to face her fully. They were in the hospital courtyard, a small garden area where patients and families could get fresh air without leaving the medical complex. The afternoon sun was filtering through the trees, casting dappled shadows on Sarah's face. "You want to know why I'm patient with you?" David said. "Because 18 months ago, I was the one who was broken. I was lying in a hospital bed with no one to call, no one to care whether I lived or died. And this incredible nurse decided that I was worth saving, worth sitting with, worth talking back to life. You didn't know me from any other patient, but you gave me your heart anyway. So now that you need someone to be patient with you, to sit with you, to help you find your way back to yourself, how could I possibly do anything else?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "But that was different. That was my job. Your job was to monitor my vitals and administer my medications. Everything else you did, the talking, the music, the staying late to make sure I wasn't alone, that wasn't your job. That was love, even though you didn't know it yet. And this isn't my job either. This is love, and love doesn't give up when things get difficult." That conversation marked a turning point in Sarah's emotional recovery. She stopped apologizing for her limitations and started focusing on the progress she was making. She also began to truly open her heart to the possibility that she and David could build something real, even if it was different from what they had before. The process of rebuilding their relationship was like constructing a house on a foundation that only one of them could see. David had all the memories, the shared experiences, the knowledge of what they had been together. Sarah had to trust his version of their story while also allowing herself to develop genuine feelings for the man he was now, not just the man she was supposed to have loved before. "Tell me about our first fight," Sarah requested one evening, as they sat in her apartment, which David had been maintaining during her hospitalization. She was slowly reacquainting herself with her own space, rediscovering her possessions and decorating choices, as if she were visiting a museum of her former life. "You want to hear about our fight?" David asked, surprised. "I want to hear about all of it," Sarah said. "The good and the bad. I feel like everyone's been painting this picture of our perfect relationship, but no relationship is perfect. If I'm going to fall in love with you again, I want to know the real you, not some idealized version. So David told her about their Christmas argument, about his insecurities and her hurt feelings, about the 3 days of stubborn silence that had felt like an eternity. Sarah listened with fascination, as if he were telling her a story about two other people entirely. "What did we learn from that fight?" she asked when he finished. "That love isn't just about the easy moments," David said. "It's about choosing each other, even when you don't understand each other, even when you're frustrated or scared, or feeling like the other person just doesn't get it." "We learned that we were both worth fighting for." "Are we still worth fighting for?" Sarah asked quietly. "Every single day," David replied. Their relationship slowly began to take on its own new shape. While David remembered their old inside jokes and shared references, he and Sarah started creating new ones. While he knew her preferences and habits from before, he discovered that some of them had changed since the accident. The woman he was falling in love with now was simultaneously familiar and completely new, like a beautiful variation on a song he thought he knew by heart. 6 months after Sarah woke up from her coma, she was cleared to return to work part-time. The hospital had been incredibly supportive, modifying her duties to accommodate her memory issues and providing her with additional training to help her readjust to the demands of nursing. Her first day back was emotional for everyone who had watched her recovery. "It feels like coming home," Sarah said to David as they walked through the halls that had been the backdrop for both of their recoveries, "but also like visiting a place I used to live a long time ago. Maybe that's what healing looks like sometimes," David suggested. "Not going back to exactly who you were, but finding a new version of yourself that incorporates everything you've learned."
Sarah stopped walking and looked at him with an expression of sudden clarity.
"That's it," she said. "That's exactly it. I've been trying so hard to remember who I was that I forgot I could choose who I want to be."
That realization seemed to unlock something in Sarah's recovery.
She stopped fighting against her changed circumstances and started embracing them. She developed new coping strategies for her memory issues, found different ways to connect with her patients, and discovered strengths she hadn't known she possessed. The traumatic brain injury had taken some things away from her, but it had also given her a unique perspective on resilience and healing that made her an even more compassionate caregiver. "You know what's funny?" Sarah said to Jennifer one day as they worked together in the ICU. "I can't remember falling in love with David the first time, but I can feel it happening again, and it's completely different but somehow also exactly the same. Does that make any sense?"
Perfect sense, Jennifer replied.
Love isn't just about memory anyway. It's about choice and compatibility, and the way someone makes you feel in the present moment. You and David might not have your old relationship, but you're building something new that's just as real. As Sarah's first anniversary of waking up from the coma approached, she and David had developed a routine that felt both comfortable and exciting. They were officially dating again, though they were taking things slowly, allowing their relationship to develop naturally rather than trying to force it back into its previous form. David had his own apartment again, but they spent most of their time together, creating new memories while honoring the ones that only David could remember. "I have something to tell you," Sarah said one evening as they were cooking dinner together in her kitchen. "I've been having dreams lately. Not memories exactly, but dreams that feel like they might be based on memories."
David looked up from the vegetables he was chopping.
"What kind of dreams?" "Dreams about you," Sarah said, blushing slightly. "About us. In the dreams, I remember loving you. I remember the way you made me feel, completely safe and cherished and understood. And when I wake up, even though I can't remember the specific moments from our relationship, I can remember the feeling of being loved by you." David set down his knife and turned to face her fully. "Sarah, are you saying?" "I'm saying that whether my memories come back or not, I know I love you now. Not because I'm supposed to, not because we had a relationship before, but because of who you are and how you make me feel every single day. I love your patience and your strength and the way you read to me when I'm having a bad day. I love that you never make me feel broken or less than what I was before. I love that you're helping me discover who I am now, not just trying to make me into who I used to be." David crossed the small kitchen in 2 steps and took Sarah in his arms. "I love you too," he said. "I love who we were together before, but I love who we're becoming even more." Their second first kiss was tender and tentative, full of promise and hope, and the recognition that love could indeed conquer even the most devastating obstacles. It was the kind of kiss that felt like a beginning and a continuation all at once. 2 years after Sarah's accident, David decided he was ready to propose. Not because he wanted to recreate what they had lost, but because he wanted to celebrate what they had found together in the aftermath of tragedy. He planned the proposal carefully, choosing a location that would be meaningful to their new relationship rather than their old one. He took Sarah to the hospital chapel where he had sat during her coma, questioning everything he believed about love and hope and cosmic justice. It was a small, quiet space that had become sacred to both of them, the place where David had made his desperate bargain with the universe, and where Sarah often went to think during her difficult days of recovery. "I have something to ask you," David said as they sat together in one of the simple wooden pews. "And I want you to know that your answer won't change how I feel about you or our relationship. We can be together for the rest of our lives, whether or not we ever get married. But Sarah, I want to marry you. Not because of who we were before, but because of who we are now and who we are becoming together." He pulled out a simple solitaire ring, elegant and classic rather than flashy. "This isn't the same ring I would have chosen 2 years ago," he said. "That ring was for the woman you were then. This ring is for the woman you are now. Strong enough to survive the unthinkable. Brave enough to fall in love again, generous enough to give me a second chance to prove myself worthy of your heart." Sarah looked at the ring, then at David's face, then back at the ring. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, but she was smiling the biggest smile David had seen from her since before the accident. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I want to marry you. I want to promise to love you and choose you and fight for us every single day for the rest of my life." The wedding took place exactly 3 years after their first meeting in Trauma Bay 3. They held the ceremony in the hospital chapel, surrounded by family, friends, and the medical staff who had witnessed their entire love story. Dr. Martinez walked Sarah down the aisle, and Jennifer served as her maid of honor. The guest list included patients they had both cared for over the years, colleagues who had supported them through the darkest periods, and family members who had never stopped believing in the power of love to heal even the most devastating wounds. Sarah's wedding dress was simple and elegant, with sleeves that covered the scars on her arms from the accident. She had initially wanted to hide all evidence of her injuries, but David had convinced her that those scars were part of their story, proof of what they had survived together. "You are not broken," he had told her during one of their wedding planning conversations. "You are beautifully, perfectly reconstructed. Every scar tells a story of survival. Every limitation you've overcome is proof of your incredible strength. I don't want you to hide those parts of yourself on our wedding day or any other day." The ceremony was officiated by the hospital chaplain who had found David in the chapel that terrible night when he thought he might lose Sarah forever. In his remarks, he talked about the different types of miracles, the medical miracles that had saved both of their lives, and the emotional miracle of love that had sustained them through everything that followed. "Sarah and David," he said as they exchanged vows, "your love story proves that the human heart is capable of surviving unthinkable trauma and emerging not just intact, but stronger than before. You have shown us that love is not just about the easy moments of joy and happiness. Love is about sitting vigil in hospital rooms, about rebuilding relationships from scratch, about choosing each other again and again even when everything has changed. Your marriage is not just a celebration of your love for each other. It's a testament to the healing power of love itself." Their vows were simple and honest, reflecting the journey they had traveled together. David promised to love Sarah not in spite of her scars, but because of everything they represented. Sarah promised to love David not because she remembered their old relationship, but because she had consciously chosen to build a new one with him. "I can't promise to remember every moment we'll share together," Sarah said, acknowledging the ongoing effects of her brain injury. "But I can promise to be present for every moment we have, to choose love over fear, and to never stop fighting for us the way you never stopped fighting for me." "I can't promise that life won't test us again," David replied, "but I can promise that whatever comes, we'll face it together. You saved my life once, and then I helped save yours. Now we get to save each other every single day for the rest of our lives." As they kissed at the altar, the small chapel erupted in applause and tears. In the audience, Margaret dabbed at her eyes with the handkerchief she had carried for 30 years, while Robert squeezed her hand and marveled at the resilience of his daughter and the man who had proven himself worthy of her love. Jennifer wiped away tears of joy, remembering the early days when she had watched Sarah fall in love with a patient and wondering if anything would come of it. Dr. Martinez smiled with the satisfaction of a man who had seen medical science and human love work hand in hand to create something beautiful. The reception was held in the hospital conference room, where Sarah and David had shared so many conversations during her recovery. The space had been transformed with flowers and fairy lights, but the underlying setting reminded everyone of the journey this couple had traveled to reach this moment. During the father-daughter dance, Robert whispered to Sarah, "I'm so proud of who you've become through all of this. You could have let the accident make you bitter or afraid, but instead, you used it to become even more loving and strong." "I had good examples," Sarah replied, looking over his shoulder at David, who was deep in conversation with her nephew about the robotics project they had been working on together. "And I had people who refused to give up on me, even when I wanted to give up on myself." The best man's speech was given by Mike, Sarah's brother, who had become one of David's closest friends during the long months of recovery. "I used to think my sister was crazy for falling in love with a patient," he said, raising his glass. "But watching David fight for Sarah the way he has, seeing him love her through the worst circumstances imaginable, and somehow come out the other side even more devoted than before, I realized that Sarah wasn't crazy at all. She was just ahead of the rest of us in recognizing something extraordinary when she saw it." As the evening wound down, Sarah and David found themselves alone in the chapel where they had been married just hours earlier. The space was quiet now, lit only by a few candles that cast dancing shadows on the walls. "Do you remember anything from our first wedding?" David asked jokingly. They had often talked about the wedding they would have had if the accident hadn't changed their lives. "I remember this wedding," Sarah said, taking his hands. "I remember standing here with you and promising to love you forever. I remember looking into your eyes and seeing my future, my partner, my best friend." DAG. "I remember feeling like the luckiest woman in the world because I get to spend the rest of my life with someone who loves me exactly as I am. That's all the memory we need," David said, pulling her close. "Everything we need to remember starts right now." They stayed in the chapel for another hour, talking about their hopes for the future, their plans for their honeymoon, their dreams of starting a family someday. They talked about the challenges they might still face, Sarah's ongoing recovery, the possibility that some of her memories might never return, the normal ups and downs of any marriage. But they also talked about their strengths, the unshakable foundation of mutual respect and support they had built, the shared understanding of what it meant to fight for love, the knowledge that they had already survived the worst thing they could imagine, and emerged stronger together. As they finally prepared to leave the hospital that had been the setting for so much of their love story, Sarah turned back for one last look at Trauma Bay 3. The room was dark now, but she could almost see the ghosts of who they had been, the broken man fighting for his life and the young nurse who had decided to save him not just medically but emotionally too. "Thank you," she whispered to the room, though she wasn't entirely sure what or whom she was thanking. Maybe she was thanking her past self for making the choice to love a stranger. Maybe she was thanking the universe for giving them a second chance. Maybe she was just thanking love itself for proving that even the most devastating circumstances couldn't destroy the human capacity for connection and hope. As they walked hand in hand toward the exit, passing the same automatic doors that had marked the beginning of their journey together, David and Sarah carried with them the knowledge that love was not just about the easy moments of happiness and joy. Love was about sitting vigil in hospital rooms and rebuilding relationships from scratch, and choosing each other again and again, even when everything had changed. Their story would become legend among the staff at St. Pierre, Mary's General Hospital. The nurse and the patient who fell in love survived a terrible tragedy and found their way back to each other through the healing power of commitment and faith. New nurses would hear their story during orientation, and young doctors would be reminded that medicine was not just about treating bodies, but about honoring the connections between hearts and souls. But for David and Sarah, their story was not a legend or a fairy tale. It was simply their life imperfect, challenging, beautiful, and absolutely real. They had learned that love was not about finding someone who would never hurt you, but about finding someone who was worth the risk of being hurt. They had discovered that healing was not about going back to who you were before, but about integrating your experiences into a new version of yourself that was stronger and wiser than before. As they drove home to start their life as husband and wife, Sarah reached over and took David's hand. She didn't remember the first time she had held his hand, but she knew it felt exactly right. And in the end, that was all the memory they needed. The knowledge that they belonged together, that they had fought for each other, and that they would continue to choose love every single day for the rest of their lives. Their love story had begun with Sarah pulling David back from death, but it had become something even more powerful. Two people pulling each other toward life, toward hope, toward the absolute certainty that love, when it's real and fought for and nurtured through even the darkest times, truly can conquer anything.